Introduction. Eiji Yoshikawa's Musashi stands as one of the towering achievements of Japanese literature, a sweeping historical epic that chronicles the life of Miyamoto Musashi, one of Japan's most legendary swordsmen. Originally serialized in the Asahi Shimbun newspaper from 1935 to 1939, the novel captured the imagination of a nation and has remained continuously in print ever since, selling tens of millions of copies worldwide. The work transforms the historical Musashi, a real figure who left behind his own writings, including the famous Book of Five Rings, into a profound meditation on the nature of mastery, the path to self-perfection, and the meaning of the warrior's way in times of peace. The novel opens in the aftermath of the Battle of Sekigahara in October 1600, one of the most decisive battles in Japanese history. This conflict established Tokugawa Ieyasu as the supreme ruler of Japan, ending decades of civil war and ushering in over 2.5 centuries of peace under the Tokugawa shogunate. For warriors like the young Takuso, who will later take the name Musashi, this transition from an age of constant warfare to an era of peace poses profound questions. What is the purpose of martial arts when there are no more wars to fight? How does one find meaning through the sword when the sword is no longer needed for survival? These questions animate the entire novel, as Musashi transforms the practice of swordsmanship from a means of killing into a path of spiritual development. The narrative spans approximately 17 years, from the aftermath of Sekigahara in 1600 to around 1612, following Musashi's transformation from a wild, violent youth named Shinmen Takuso into the enlightened warrior philosopher Miyamoto Musashi. Along the way, the story weaves together multiple interconnected plotlines involving a rich cast of characters. Atsu, the devoted young woman who loves Musashi and follows him across Japan despite his repeated rejections, represents unwavering love and patience. Matahachi, Musashi's childhood friend who chooses the path of least resistance at every turn, serves as a tragic counterpoint showing what Musashi might have become. Takuen Soho, the eccentric Zen priest who saves Takuso and sets him on his path, embodies unconventional wisdom. Sasaki Kajiro, the elegant and deadly swordsman who becomes Musashi's greatest rival, represents technical perfection without spiritual depth. Through these interconnected stories, Yoshikawa explores timeless themes of self-discipline, the nature of true strength, the relationship between martial arts and personal development, love and duty, and the endless pursuit of the way. The novel is structured into 7 books, each named after one of the classical Japanese elements or concepts: earth, water, fire, wind, sky, sun, and moon, and the way of life and death. These titles are not merely organizational devices, but reflect different phases in Musashi's development. Earth represents his grounding and early formation, water his adaptability and flow, fire his passionate struggle and combat, wind the external influences and teachings he encounters, sky his transcendence of mere technique, sun and moon the integration of opposing principles, and the way of life and death his final understanding of what it means to live fully. What follows is a detailed chapter-by-chapter summary that preserves the structure and progression of Yoshikawa's masterwork while capturing the depth of its themes and the richness of its characters. Book I, Earth. The first book establishes the foundations of the story, introducing us to the young Takuso in the immediate aftermath of the catastrophic Battle of Sekigahara. Like the element of earth, this section grounds us in place, character, and circumstance. We learn of Takuso's violent past, his troubled family history, and the events that will set him on his transformative journey. The book culminates in his symbolic death and rebirth under the guidance of the Zen priest Takuen Soho, emerging as Miyamoto Musashi with a new name and a new purpose. Chapter 1, The Little Bell. The novel opens on the rain-soaked battlefield of Sekigahara in October 1600, in the days following the great battle that would determine the fate of Japan. The Western Army, loyal to the Toyotomi clan, has been catastrophically defeated by the eastern forces of Tokugawa Ieyasu. Tens of thousands lie dead or dying across the muddy fields, and the survivors of the losing side are being hunted like animals by Tokugawa forces, eager to eliminate any future threat. Among the countless corpses and the barely living lies Shinmen Taxo, a 17-year-old from the remote village of Miyamoto in Mimasaka Province. He had come to this battle with his childhood friend Hanaiden Matahachi, both of them seeking glory, advancement, and escape from their small village existence. They had joined the Western Army not out of political conviction, but out of youthful hunger for adventure and recognition. Now that army is destroyed, and Taxo lies grievously wounded, drifting between life and death. Through the mist and rain comes Atsu, a young woman from Miyamoto village who is betrothed to Matahachi. She has traveled to the battlefield area hoping for news of her fiancé, accompanied by the unconventional Zen priest Takuen Soho. As they pick their way through the carnage, Atsu hears a faint sound, the tinkling of a small bell. She recognizes it immediately. Before the young men left for battle, she had given Taxo a small bell as a charm for protection. Following the sound, they discover Taxo, barely alive, his body covered in wounds and caked mud. Despite the enormous danger of being caught helping a fugitive from the defeated army, an act punishable by death, Atsu insists on saving him. She cannot abandon someone from her village, someone she has known since childhood, regardless of his reputation as a troublemaker. Takuen, observing her compassion and determination with interest, helps her drag the unconscious Taxo to a nearby abandoned temple. The days that follow are touch and go. Taxo burns with fever, thrashing in delirium, reliving the horrors of the battle in his broken sleep. Atsu tends to him with dedication, changing his bandages, forcing water between his cracked lips, and watching over him through the long nights. During his periods of half-consciousness, Taxo mumbles fragments of memory. The chaos of the battle, the screams of dying men, the moment when everything fell apart and the army disintegrated into a rout. He also speaks of Matahachi, suggesting that they became separated during the retreat. Atsu listens anxiously for any news of her fiancé, but Taxo's fevered ramblings provide no clear answers. Takuen, meanwhile, observes everything with the penetrating gaze of one who sees beneath surfaces. He recognizes something in Taxo, not just physical strength and the will to survive, but a kind of raw potential that could develop in many different directions. This young man could become a great warrior, Takuen senses, or he could become a great monster. Everything depends on what happens next. Chapter 2, The Comb. While Taxo slowly recovers from his wounds, the narrative shifts to reveal the fate of Matahachi, showing us immediately the divergent paths the two friends will take. Matahachi has survived the battle by a different route, not through strength or determination, but through luck and the willingness to accept help from questionable sources. Wounded and lost after the army's collapse, he was found not by friends but by Oko, a widow of about 30, and her daughter Akemi, a girl of perhaps 15 or 16. These two women make their living in the most ghoulish way possible. They follow battles, waiting for the fighting to end, and then strip valuables from the dead and dying. They are battlefield scavengers, and they have learned to be ruthless in their trade. Oko immediately recognizes that Matahachi, despite his wounds, is young, reasonably good-looking, and potentially useful. She brings him to her small house and begins nursing him back to health, but her ministrations come with expectations. Oko is a sensuous, manipulative woman who has survived by using men, and she sees in Matahachi an easy target. He is weak-willed, susceptible to flattery, and clearly enjoys comfort more than hardship. Within days, she has seduced him, and he quickly falls under her spell, forgetting his wounds, forgetting the battle, and most significantly, forgetting his promise to return to Atsu, the young woman waiting faithfully for him back in Miyamoto village. When Matahachi finds a valuable ornamental comb among the spoils that Oko and Akemi have collected, he keeps it for himself rather than turning it over to their common hoard. This small act of dishonesty and self-interest symbolizes his first step toward moral compromise, the beginning of a long descent. The contrast between the two friends could not be more stark. While Taxo struggles back from the edge of death through sheer will, Matahachi recovers in comfort, coddled and seduced. While Taxo dreams of returning home to face whatever consequences await, Matahachi actively avoids thinking about his responsibilities. When Oko suggests that he stay with her rather than returning to Miyamoto, He readily agrees, telling himself that he will go back eventually, that Atsu will understand, that there is no hurry. These rationalizations will become a pattern throughout the novel. Matahachi is not evil, he is simply weak, always choosing the easier path, always finding reasons to avoid difficulty and responsibility. In this, he serves as Yoshikawa's portrait of ordinary human failure, the tragedy of wasted potential, the slow erosion of character through accumulated small surrenders. Chapter 3, The Flower Festival. The scene shifts to Miyamoto Village, where life continues despite the absence of the young men who left for war. The village is preparing for a local flower festival, a traditional celebration that provides a backdrop for exploring the community's complex feelings about its absent sons. Taxo's sister, Oghin, struggles to maintain the family's small holding, working the fields alone and enduring the whispered comments of neighbors who have never forgotten her brother's violent reputation. Even before leaving for Sekigahara, Taxo was known throughout the region as a wild, dangerous youth. He had killed a man at age 13, an incident that haunted him and defined him in the eyes of his community. His father, Munisai, had been a martial arts instructor of some skill, but he was also a harsh, brutal man who beat young Taxo regularly, perhaps contributing to the violence that seemed to run in the kid's blood. Atsu has been staying with the Honaiden family, Matahachi's household, as is proper for a betrothed woman waiting for her fiancé's return. Matahachi's mother, Asugi, is the dominant figure in the household, a proud, fierce woman obsessed with family honor and reputation. She has high expectations for her son and treats Atsu with the condescension of a mother-in-law who considers her future daughter-in-law barely adequate for her precious kid. When rumors begin to circulate that both Taxo and Matahachi may have survived the battle, the village reacts with mixed emotions. Some hope for happy reunions, others, particularly those who remember Taxo's violent past, dread his return. The flower festival proceeds with its rituals and celebrations, but beneath the surface gaiety, tensions simmer. The chapter uses this occasion to explore the rigid social hierarchies and suspicious nature of rural Japanese society, where everyone knows everyone's business and reputation is everything. We also learn more about Atsu's background and character in this chapter. She is an orphan, raised by a temple, trained in the classical arts including flute playing. Her engagement to Matahachi was arranged, not a love match, but she has committed herself to it with the same quiet determination she brings to everything. She is not a passive figure, she has strength and dignity, but her strength expresses itself through patience and endurance rather than action. Her decision to search for Taxo after the battle, and her insistence on saving him despite the danger, reveals a capacity for courage that will develop throughout the novel. The chapter ends with the village still waiting, still hoping, unaware of the dramas unfolding elsewhere that will soon shatter its peace. Chapter 4, The Dowager's Wrath. This chapter focuses on Asugi, Matahachi's mother, and establishes her as one of the novel's most complex and ultimately tragic figures. When news reaches the village that Matahachi has apparently abandoned his fiancée to run off with another woman, the scavenging widow Oko, Asugi is consumed with shame and fury. In the rigid honor culture of Tokugawa Japan, such behavior brings disgrace not just on the individual, but on the entire family. The Honaiden name, which Asugi has spent her life protecting and promoting, is now the subject of village gossip and contempt. But rather than directing her anger at her son, who is actually responsible for the disgrace, Asugi performs a psychological maneuver that will define her character for the rest of the novel. She projects her fury onto others. First, she blames Atsu for somehow failing to hold Matahachi's loyalty. Then, she convinces herself that Taxo must have led her precious son astray, that without Taxo's bad influence, Matahachi would never have behaved so shamefully. This displacement of blame becomes a consuming obsession that will drive Asugi's actions for years to come. She cannot accept that her son is weak and faithless, therefore, someone else must be responsible. Taxo, with his violent reputation and his friendship with Matahachi, becomes the perfect scapegoat. Asugi begins spreading her version of events throughout the village, painting Taxo as the villain who corrupted her innocent kid. Meanwhile, Taxo has finally recovered enough to begin making his way back toward Miyamoto. He travels by night and hides by day, knowing that as a survivor of the defeated Western Army, he is a hunted man. The Tokugawa authorities have posted rewards for the capture of fugitives, and any village that harbors them faces severe punishment. Despite these dangers, Taxo feels compelled to return. He must deliver news of Matahachi to the Honeiden family. He must see his sister Oghin, and he must face whatever consequences await him. His return to the region is marked by violence. When samurai in service to the new Tokugawa order attempt to capture him, Taxo fights back with the ferocity that earned him his dark reputation. He kills several men, confirming in everyone's minds that he is exactly the dangerous criminal they believed him to be. The authorities intensify their search, now hunting not just a battlefield fugitive but a murderer of government soldiers. Taxo is forced to flee into the mountains, beginning a period of feral existence that will strip away everything civilized and leave only raw survival instinct. Asugi, hearing of these killings, becomes even more convinced of her narrative. Taxo is evil incarnate, and her son's disgrace must somehow be his fault. She begins planning her revenge, starting a vendetta that will consume decades of her life. Chapter 5. The Art of War. Taxo takes refuge in the mountains surrounding Miyamoto, entering a period of existence more animal than human. He lives in caves and hollow trees, surviving on whatever he can catch or forage, roots, berries, the occasional rabbit or bird caught with his bare hands. He drinks from streams and sleeps on bare rock. His clothes rot and tear until they are barely rags. His hair grows long and matted. He becomes a creature of pure instinct, his senses sharpening as civilization falls away. This period in the wilderness is crucial to his development, though he does not yet understand why. He is being stripped of everything external, status, comfort, society, until only his essential nature remains. Whether that essential nature is good or evil, human or bestial, remains to be seen. The Tokugawa authorities, frustrated by their inability to capture this single fugitive who has killed several of their men, enlist the help of a renowned warrior named Aoki Tanzeman. Tanzeman is a professional, a man who has made his living hunting criminals and subduing dangerous fighters. He is intrigued by the reports of Taxo's ferocity and fighting ability. Most fugitives are desperate and clumsy, easy to trap, but this one seems to be something different. Tanzeman organizes a systematic search of the mountains, using trained men who know how to track and how to set ambushes. But Taxo eludes them again and again, demonstrating remarkable cunning and an intimate knowledge of the terrain. He seems to sense their presence before they see him, to know which paths they will take, to always be one step ahead. Tanzeman begins to develop a grudging respect for his quarry, and a determination to be the one who finally brings him down. During this period, the young Zen priest Takwen Soho observes the unfolding drama with keen interest. Takwen is an unusual figure, irreverent, unconventional, seemingly careless of his religious status, yet possessed of genuine wisdom and insight. He has been watching Taxo since the battlefield where he helped Atsu save the young man's life, and he sees something in this wild fugitive that others cannot perceive. Beyond the violence and the animal savagery, Takwen senses enormous potential, the raw material from which a truly great human being might be forged. But that potential could just as easily become something terrible. Taxo stands at a crossroads, though he doesn't know it yet. Everything depends on what happens next, on whether someone can reach him before he becomes permanently lost in his own darkness. Takwen begins formulating a plan. Chapter 6. The Old Cryptomeria Tree. The manhunt for Taxo reaches a crisis point when the authorities threaten collective punishment against the village of Miyamoto and against Taxo's sister Oghin personally. In Tokugawa, Japan, such collective responsibility was standard practice. Families and communities were held accountable for the actions of their members. Oghin is arrested and interrogated harshly, suspected of knowing her brother's whereabouts or of helping him evade capture. She knows nothing useful, but this does not protect her from suspicion and mistreatment. The entire village lives under a cloud, with the threat of severe punishment hanging over everyone if the fugitive is not surrendered. This pressure creates desperation. Some villagers begin actively searching for Taxo, hoping to turn him in and end their collective jeopardy. Atsu, who has grown close to Oghin during the months of waiting and uncertainty, feels responsible for the current crisis. After all, she was the one who insisted on saving Taxo after the battle. If she had left him to die on the battlefield, none of this would be happening. But she cannot regret that choice, and she cannot stand by while Oghin suffers. Atsu makes a courageous decision. She will go into the mountains herself and find Taxo. She hopes to convince him to surrender for his sister's sake, not to the authorities, who would surely execute him, but to Taquan, who might be able to negotiate a better outcome. Armed only with her determination and her knowledge of the local terrain, Atsu climbs into the wilderness where armed men have failed to penetrate. After days of searching, suffering from exhaustion and exposure, Atsu finally locates Taxo. She finds him hiding in the hollow of a massive old cryptomeria tree, an ancient cedar whose trunk has rotted out to form a natural shelter. He is barely recognizable, emaciated, wild-eyed, more beast than man. Their reunion is intensely emotional. Atsu pleads with him to think of his sister, to give himself up before Oghin is killed for his crimes. Taxo, despite his degraded state, is moved by her courage and her concern. He struggles between his fierce pride, which cannot accept surrender, and his genuine love for his sister. For the first time, he begins to see Atsu not as his friend's fiancée, someone else's woman, but as a person in her own right, someone who cares for him personally. Something shifts between them in that hollow tree, the beginning of a bond that will persist throughout the novel. But Taxo is not yet ready to surrender. The wild animal in him still fights against any kind of submission. Chapter 7. The Rock and the Tree. Taquan Soho now takes decisive action, recognizing that the situation has reached a point where only intervention can prevent tragedy. Through clever manipulation and psychological insight, he arranges a trap for Taxo, but not the kind of trap the authorities have been setting. Taquan understands that Taxo cannot be captured by force. He is too strong, too cunning, too determined. Instead, he must be captured by his own heart. Taquan positions himself as a mediator, approaching Taxo with an offer. Surrender to him, not to the authorities, and he will try to find a way to save both Taxo and Oghin. He uses Taxo's love for his sister as leverage, but not cruelly. Rather, he is showing Taxo that his connections to others are both his weakness and his potential salvation. The actual capture is accomplished through a combination of cunning and surprise. Taquan prepares drugged food which Taxo, weakened by his weeks of feral existence, eventually accepts and eats. When Taxo falls unconscious, Taquan, with help from villagers, binds him securely. But Taquan does not simply hand him over to the authorities. Instead, he does something extraordinary. He has Taxo hung from a high branch of the same massive cryptomeria tree where Atsu found him hiding. Suspended high above the ground, ropes cutting into his limbs, Taxo awakens to find himself utterly helpless for perhaps the first time in his life. He rages, struggles, screams curses, but there is nothing he can do. The great fighter, the killer who defeated trained samurai, has been reduced to complete impotence by a skinny priest without a weapon. This imprisonment in the tree becomes the crucible of Taxo's transformation. Taquan visits him daily, engaging him in conversations that seem random but are actually carefully designed to crack open Taxo's defenses. He challenges Taxo's assumptions about strength and weakness. What good is your physical power now? Is this the strength you were so proud of? You could kill a dozen men in a fight, but you couldn't protect your sister, couldn't help your friend, couldn't do anything but run and hide like an animal. Is that what you want your life to be? These questions penetrate where swords could not. Taxo is forced to confront the emptiness of his previous existence, the futility of mere physical prowess without wisdom or purpose. The days pass, and slowly, something begins to change inside him. Chapter 8. In the cage. Taxo's ordeal in the tree continues for many days. Some accounts suggest as long as a week or more. Exposed to sun and rain, tormented by insects, suffering from hunger and thirst and the agony of his bound position, he is reduced to a state of complete physical helplessness. His body, which he had always relied upon, has become a prison. He cannot fight, cannot flee, cannot do anything but hang there and think. And for the first time in his violent, instinct-driven life, Taxo truly thinks. He has time, endless time, to review his life, his choices, his actions. He remembers his father's beatings and his own answering rage. He remembers the man he killed at 13, the hot blood on his hands, the screaming and the silence that followed. He remembers Sekigahara, the chaos and slaughter, the moment when he realized that war was not glorious, but simply butchery on a grand scale. Takuen's visits become philosophical dialogues, though Takuso at first responds with nothing but curses and defiance. The priest is patient, seemingly impervious to insult. He speaks of the way, not any specific way, but the principle of dedicated self-cultivation that underlies all the Japanese arts, from tea ceremony to flower arrangement to swordsmanship. He tells Takuso that his wild strength is actually a form of weakness, because it is undirected and undisciplined. A storm is powerful, but it destroys without purpose and exhausts itself quickly. A river is also powerful, but its power is sustained and directed. It carves canyons, nourishes fields, carries boats to the sea. Which would you rather be? Takuso has no answer at first, but the question lodges in his mind. Gradually, the defiance drains out of him. Hanging helpless under the sky, watching the stars wheel overhead at night and the clouds pass by day, Takuso experiences something like a death of his old self. The violent, reactive, instinct-driven Takuso cannot survive this ordeal. He is not equipped for it. Something else must take his place. Takuen speaks of Buddhism, of Zen, of the possibility of awakening to one's true nature. He speaks of great warriors who were also poets and painters, men who understood that the sword was merely one expression of a larger truth. He speaks of the possibility of transformation, not changing into someone else, but becoming more fully oneself by stripping away everything false and unnecessary. By the time Takuso is finally cut down and handed over to the local lord, he is a different person than the one who was strung up. The animal is still there, the strength, the instincts, the capacity for violence, but now there is something else as well, the beginning of consciousness, of reflection, of genuine thought about who he is and who he might become. Chapter 9. The Baptism. Takuen has not merely captured Takuso, he has also been negotiating with the authorities. Using his connections and his considerable persuasive abilities, he has arranged a remarkable outcome. Lord Aikta Terumasa, the regional ruler, has agreed to spare Takuso's life on certain conditions. Instead of execution, Takuso will be imprisoned in the castle's donjon, not in the dungeons, but in a room filled with books. For 3 years, he will be confined there, allowed to do nothing but read. This sentence is Takuen's masterwork. He has understood that Takuso's potential can only be developed through education, through exposure to ideas he has never encountered, through the cultivation of his mind to match the cultivation of his body. Physical training has made Takuso deadly. Now mental training will make him wise. The years in the donjon transform Takuso utterly. He arrives barely literate, a product of his rural village and his father's brutal tutelage. He leaves as a learned man, having read voraciously through the castle's remarkable library. He studies Sun Tzu's Art of War and other Chinese military classics, absorbing their principles of strategy and their insights into the psychology of conflict. He reads Confucian texts on ethics, duty, and the ordering of society. He encounters Zen Buddhist writings that speak of enlightenment through direct experience rather than intellectual understanding. He studies treatises on swordsmanship by Japan's great masters, learning the theoretical principles underlying the techniques he has developed through instinct. Perhaps most importantly, he reads poetry, Japanese and Chinese verses that reveal the capacity of language to capture beauty and truth, that show him dimensions of human experience he had never imagined. When his 3 years of confinement end, Takuen returns to perform what he calls a baptism. In a simple ceremony, he gives Takuso a new name, Miyamoto Musashi. The family name Miyamoto connects him to his home village, grounding his new identity in his origins. The personal name Musashi is an alternative reading of the characters that can also be read as Takuso. It is the same name transformed, just as the man has been transformed. From this moment forward, Takuso ceases to exist. There is only Musashi. This renaming is not merely symbolic. It represents a genuine psychological rebirth. Musashi leaves the castle as a new person, with new purposes and new understanding. He is still a warrior, that much has not changed and never will. But now his practice of the martial arts will be in service of something greater than mere fighting. He will pursue the way of the sword not to kill but to perfect himself, seeking in combat a path to enlightenment. Chapter 10. The Bridge. Musashi emerges from his years of confinement a free man, free legally, because his sentence has been served, but also free internally in a way he has never experienced before. The wild animal that once drove him has been tamed, not destroyed but brought under the control of his conscious will. The rage that used to explode unpredictably is now a force he can direct and channel. He has purpose now, to pursue the way of the sword to its ultimate conclusion, to achieve a mastery that encompasses not just technique but wisdom, not just killing but living. Takuen offers him final advice before they part. Travel widely, the priest says. Seek out strong opponents and test yourself against them. But remember always that the purpose is not to prove your superiority or to collect victories. The purpose is to learn about combat, about yourself, about the nature of existence. Each opponent is a teacher. Each fight is a lesson. Victory and defeat are both illusions, only growth is real. Before leaving the region, Musashi attempts to see Atsu. He wants to thank her for saving his life after Sekigahara, for risking herself to find him in the mountains, for her patience and her faith. More than that, though he cannot fully admit it even to himself, he wants to see her simply because he wants to see her. During his years in the donjon, he has thought of her often, remembering her face, her voice, the courage she showed in coming to find him. But circumstances prevent their meeting. Atsu has left the Hanaiden house after a final break with Matahachi's family, and no one knows exactly where she has gone. Musashi leaves word for her, hoping she will receive it, but he cannot wait indefinitely. He must begin his warrior's pilgrimage. Atsu, for her part, has been waiting for Musashi throughout his imprisonment, as faithfully as she once waited for Matahachi. But her feelings have changed. Where her engagement to Matahachi was duty, her devotion to Musashi is love. She has realized this gradually over the years, recognizing that her heart was given to Musashi from the moment she pulled him from the battlefield. When she learns that he has left without seeing her, she is heartbroken, but also determined. She makes a vow, she will follow him. Wherever he goes, whatever dangers she must face, she will find him and stay with him. This vow will define her life for years to come. The first book ends with Musashi crossing a bridge at dawn, leaving his old life behind and stepping onto a new path. Behind him, unseen, Atsu watches and then begins to follow. Book Roman 2, Water. The second book, named for water, depicts Musashi in his most fluid and adaptive phase. Like water, he flows into new environments, takes on new challenges, and begins to find his natural shape as a swordsman. This section includes his famous confrontation with the Yoshioka school in Kyoto, establishing his reputation and demonstrating the devastating effectiveness of his approach to combat. But it also shows his growing awareness that mere victory is not enough, that the way requires something beyond defeating opponents. Chapter 1. The Yoshioka School. Several years have passed since Musashi left his home region. He has been wandering throughout Japan, engaging in duels and matches wherever he finds worthy opponents, testing his techniques and his understanding against fighters of every school and style. His reputation has begun to spread. Stories circulate of a tall, rough-looking swordsman who appears seemingly from nowhere, defeats local champions, and then moves on without seeking reward or position. Some call him a demon. Others say he is the greatest natural talent since the legendary swordsmen of old. Musashi pays little attention to these stories. He is focused entirely on his practice, refining his techniques through actual combat, learning from each encounter what works and what does not. Now he arrives in Kyoto, the imperial capital and the cultural heart of Japan. Kyoto is everything his home village was not: sophisticated, cosmopolitan, ancient, and refined. Here the most prestigious martial arts schools operate, schools with histories stretching back generations, schools that have served shoguns and emperors. The most famous of these is the Yoshioka school, which for generations has provided sword instructors to the Ashikaga shoguns. Though the Ashikaga shogunate has fallen, replaced by the Tokugawa, the Yoshioka name still carries enormous prestige. The school is currently headed by two brothers, Yoshioka Seijiro, the elder, who serves as the official head but who has become something of a dissolute playboy, more interested in the pleasure quarters than in martial arts, and Yoshioka Denshihiro, the younger brother, who is more serious about swordsmanship but also more arrogant and inflexible. Musashi goes directly to the Yoshioka compound and announces that he wishes to challenge the head of the school. This directness, some would say rudeness, is characteristic of Musashi. He has no patience for elaborate preliminaries, for the social niceties that govern interactions between martial artists of different schools. He wants to fight the best, and the Yoshioka school is reputed to be the best. Therefore, he will challenge them. The Yoshioka retainers are outraged by this provincial upstart's audacity. They explain that Seijiro is not available. That one does not simply walk in off the street and demand to fight the head of a school with centuries of history. Musashi replies that he will wait, leaving word where he can be found when Seijiro is ready to accept his challenge. His calm confidence unnerves the Yoshioka disciples more than bluster would have. There is something disturbing about a man who seems so certain of victory before a blow has been struck. Chapter 2. The Yoshioka Successor. The Yoshioka school faces an internal crisis that predates Musashi's challenge, but is brought into sharp focus by it. Their father, Yoshioka Kenpo, was a genuinely great swordsman who earned the school's prestigious position through real ability. But neither of his sons has inherited his skill or his dedication. Seijiro, as the elder son and official heir, should be leading the school, but he has abandoned serious training in favor of pleasure-seeking. He spends his nights in the entertainment districts, drinking and consorting with courtesans, returning to the school only to maintain appearances. His technique has grown sloppy, his reflexes dulled by dissipation. The senior disciples whisper among themselves, worried about the school's future, but bound by loyalty and tradition to support the family. Denshihiro is more committed to the martial arts, but his commitment is polluted by arrogance. He has inherited his father's technique, but not his humility, and he dismisses other schools and styles without bothering to understand them. When he hears of Musashi's challenge, he is contemptuous. What can this unknown wanderer possibly know that the Yoshioka school does not? He argues that Seijiro should simply ignore the challenge, that responding would dignify an insult. But other disciples point out that refusing to fight would appear cowardly, would suggest that the Yoshioka school fears this challenger. The debate reveals deep fractures within the school, those who want to maintain traditions at all costs versus those who recognize that the school is in decline and needs to adapt or die. Meanwhile, through various narrative connections, we learn that Seijiro has become involved with a woman named Akemi, the same Akemi who, with her mother Oko, had taken in Matahachi after the Battle of Sekigahara years before. Akemi has grown up and become a courtesan, using her beauty and intelligence to navigate the complex world of Kyoto's pleasure quarters. Seijiro is one of her clients, though not her only one. These connections, Akemi to Matahachi to Musashi, Seijiro to Akemi to the world Musashi left behind, create a web of relationships that will generate unexpected complications. Yoshikawa uses these interconnections to show how lives touch and influence each other in ways the participants often do not recognize, how the past continually reaches into the present. Chapter 3. A Spring Breeze. While waiting for the Yoshioka school to respond to his challenge, Musashi explores Kyoto, and the city begins to work its subtle influence on him. This is a place of temples and gardens, of poetry and painting, of tea ceremony and flower arrangement, arts that seem far removed from swordsmanship, but which, Musashi begins to realize, may express the same underlying principles. He visits ancient shrines where swordsmen of legend trained and left offerings. He walks through gardens designed to evoke natural landscapes in miniature, gardens where every rock and plant has been placed with precise intention. He watches tea masters perform their ceremonies, transforming the simple act of serving tea into something approaching meditation. During this period, Musashi has a chance encounter that will prove significant. In a shop specializing in fine metalwork, he meets Hanami Kotsu, one of the most celebrated artists of the age. Kotsu is known for his calligraphy, his pottery, his work in lacquer, but also for his expertise in appreciating and authenticating swords. He is a Renaissance figure, a man who sees connections between all the arts and who has devoted his life to pursuing beauty in multiple forms. When Kotsu notices Musashi, this rough, intense figure so different from the refined patrons who usually frequent such establishments, he is intrigued rather than dismissive. They have a brief conversation about swords, about the relationship between a blade's practical function and its aesthetic qualities. Kotsu suggests that a truly great sword is not merely a weapon but a work of art, and that a truly great swordsman might be not just a fighter but an artist as well. This conversation plants seeds in Musashi's mind that will flower over time. He begins to see that the way of the sword might be connected to other ways: the way of tea, the way of calligraphy, the way of poetry. All these disciplines share certain characteristics: the emphasis on years of dedicated practice, the goal of achieving a state where conscious effort disappears and only natural action remains, the understanding that technical mastery is merely the beginning rather than the end of the journey. Musashi is still primarily a fighter, his understanding still expressed mainly through combat, but his horizons are expanding. He also continues to seek information about Matahachi, hoping to find his old friend and perhaps help him recover from whatever troubles have befallen him, but no clear news emerges. The spring breezes blow through Kyoto's streets and Musashi waits for the Yoshioka school to make its move. Chapter 4. Reunion in Kyoto. Atsu has finally tracked Musashi to Kyoto after years of searching. Her journey has been long and extraordinarily difficult. A young woman traveling alone in Tokugawa, Japan, faces endless dangers and obstacles. She has been robbed, threatened, exploited, and repeatedly told that her quest is foolish, that she should return home and accept a proper marriage. But she has persisted through all of it, supporting herself by playing her flute at temples and festivals, by doing domestic work, by accepting whatever honest employment she can find. Along the way, her skills as a musician have grown. She plays with real artistry now, and her performances attract attention and earn enough to keep her alive. But she never forgets her purpose, and she never stops asking after a tall, rough-looking swordsman who travels alone. When she finally locates Musashi in Kyoto, the reunion is deeply emotional for both of them, and deeply painful. Musashi is moved to see her. He has thought of her often during his wandering years, and her face has become a kind of touchstone in his memory, a reminder of gentleness and devotion in a life otherwise filled with violence. But he has also committed himself to his path, and he believes, or has convinced himself, that this path requires him to remain unattached. He tells Atsu that he cannot be with her, that his pursuit of the way of the sword demands his complete attention and energy, that attachment to another person would be a distraction he cannot afford. He speaks of the great swordsmen of legend, how they lived as wandering monks, how they sacrificed everything for their art. Atsu, heartbroken but not defeated, refuses to accept his reasoning. She argues that love and the martial way need not be incompatible, that in fact a warrior who has never loved, who has cut himself off from human connection, is incomplete, not more perfect. She points to examples of great men who had wives, families, disciples who loved them. But Musashi is not ready to hear this argument. His self-discipline has become a kind of armor, protecting him from vulnerability, and he is afraid, though he would never admit it, that if he allows Atsu into his life, she will become a weakness his enemies can exploit. Their conversation ends in stalemate. Musashi insists he must walk alone, and Atsu declares that she will continue to follow him and wait for him regardless, for as long as it takes, for the rest of her life if necessary. Chapter 5. Duel at Rendai Field. The much-anticipated duel between Musashi and Yoshioka Seijiro finally takes place at Rendai Field on the outskirts of Kyoto. The event has attracted considerable attention throughout the city. Everyone who cares about martial arts wants to see whether this unknown challenger can truly threaten the prestigious Yoshioka school. Seijiro arrives with an elaborate entourage: dozens of disciples, servants carrying banners, a palanquin for the master himself. It is a display of status and wealth intended to intimidate, to remind everyone that the Yoshioka school has powerful connections and centuries of tradition behind it. Musashi arrives alone, on foot, carrying only his swords. He has no disciples, no servants, no banners. This contrast in presentation already tells a story about the two men and their approaches to the martial arts. The duel itself is shockingly brief. After the formal preliminaries, the bows, the announcements, the positioning, Seijiro attacks with a combination that he has practiced countless times, a technique that has become his signature. But Musashi is not where Seijiro expects him to be. Moving with uncanny timing, he sidesteps the attack and strikes simultaneously, a single devastating blow that catches Seijiro across the arm. Bone cracks. Seijiro's sword falls from his suddenly useless hand. He collapses to the ground, the duel over in a single exchange. The Yoshioka disciples stand stunned. Centuries of tradition, years of training, the prestige of a great name, none of it mattered when steel met steel. Musashi does not press his advantage, does not finish off his helpless opponent. He has moved beyond the need to kill unnecessarily. He sheathes his sword, nods briefly to the stricken Yoshioka retinue, and walks away. The aftermath is devastating for the Yoshioka school. Seijiro is carried away in disgrace, his arm so badly damaged that he will never fight again. The disciples must confront the shattering realization that their school's vaunted invincibility was always partly illusion, that when faced with genuine ability, tradition and reputation count for nothing. Some begin to drift away, seeking other teachers, other schools. Others stay loyal but are shaken. And Yoshioka Denshihiro, the younger brother, is consumed with rage and the need for revenge. He immediately begins preparing his own challenge to Musashi, vowing to restore the family honor or die trying. The consequences of this single duel will reverberate through the next several books, as the Yoshioka conflict escalates toward its bloody conclusion. Chapter 6. The Spreading Pine. After his decisive victory over Seijiro, Musashi retreats from Kyoto's excitement to a spot near Ikijoji Temple, on the city's outskirts. Here stands an ancient spreading pine tree, its branches reaching out like arms, its presence somehow reassuring in its permanence. Musashi spends long hours beneath this tree, practicing his techniques but also thinking, reflecting on what has happened and what it means. He won the duel, won it easily, in fact, but the victory has left him strangely unsatisfied. There was no real challenge in defeating Seijiro, whose skills had deteriorated through years of neglect. Musashi learned nothing from the encounter, gained nothing except a reputation for having defeated a famous name that turned out to be hollow. This dissatisfaction leads Musashi to deeper questions. What is the ultimate purpose of martial arts? If it is simply to be the strongest, to defeat all opponents, then what happens when there are no more worthy opponents to defeat? Is he supposed to spend his life cutting down men like Seijiro, whose reputations exceed their abilities? That seems pointless, even grotesque. There must be something more, some higher purpose that the sword can serve. Musashi thinks about Takuen's teachings, about the way that the priest spoke of during those long days hanging in the cryptomeria tree. The way is not about defeating others, Takuen had said. It is about perfecting oneself. Each opponent, each challenge, is merely an opportunity for growth. The goal is not victory but understanding, not the death of others but the transcendence of one's own limitations. While Musashi meditates beneath the spreading pine, the Yoshioka school plots its revenge. Denshihiro, though more skilled than his brother, has recognized that he may not be able to defeat Musashi in fair combat. The Yoshioka disciples discuss other options that involve multiple attackers, ambushes, the abandonment of the honor code that supposedly governs such matters. They tell themselves that Musashi is the one who violated honor by his presumptuous challenge, that they are merely evening the scales. But the reality is simpler. They fear him, and they will do whatever is necessary to eliminate that fear. Denshihiro sends a formal challenge, setting a time and place for their duel, but behind the scenes, darker preparations are underway. Chapter 7. The Battle of Ikijoji. The appointed night arrives for the duel between Musashi and Denshihiro. The location is near Ikijoji Temple, beneath the famous spreading pine. But Musashi, ever cautious, arrives early and conceals himself to observe the situation. What he sees confirms his suspicions. Denshihiro has come not alone but with an army. Dozens of armed men have gathered, some hiding in the trees, others crouching in ditches, all waiting for Musashi to appear so they can fall upon him together. This is not to be a duel but an execution. The Yoshioka school has abandoned any pretense of honor. They simply want Musashi dead, and they are willing to use any means to achieve it. Musashi waits, watching, planning. He notes the positions of the hidden men, estimates their numbers, considers his options. A conventional warrior would withdraw, would refuse to face such impossible odds. But Musashi is not conventional. He has trained for years to face multiple opponents, has fought on battlefields where enemies came from all directions. More importantly, he sees in this situation an opportunity, a chance to test himself against the ultimate challenge, to discover whether his skills and his spirit are equal to the impossible. As the appointed time approaches and passes, Denshihiro grows increasingly anxious. Where is Musashi? Has he fled, showing himself a coward after all? Then, with explosive suddenness, Musashi bursts from his concealment. He does not go toward the obvious trap, but circles to attack from an unexpected direction, where the men are most spread out and least prepared. His first target is Denshihiro himself, cut down in a single stroke before the younger Yoshioka can even draw his sword properly. Then Musashi turns to face the mob. What follows is one of the most famous passages in the novel. A single warrior against overwhelming odds, fighting with a combination of supernatural skill, fierce determination, and tactical brilliance. Musashi uses the terrain, the trees, the slopes, the darkness, to prevent his enemies from coordinating their attacks. He fights not 1 against 50, but a series of 1 against 1 encounters, eliminating opponents before they can organize. When multiple attackers do reach him simultaneously, he moves in patterns they cannot predict, his swords weaving a web of steel that none can penetrate. By the time dawn begins to light in the eastern sky, the field of Ikijoji is covered with dead and dying Yoshioka disciples. Musashi himself is wounded. He has taken cuts on his arms and legs. He is covered in blood, both his own and others. But he is alive and still fighting. The surviving Yoshioka men finally break and flee, their spirit shattered. Musashi does not pursue. He stands alone beneath the spreading pine tree, breathing hard, sword still in hand, surveying the carnage he has created. The Yoshioka school as a fighting force is destroyed. It will never recover from this night. Musashi has proven that a single warrior of sufficient skill can overcome any number of lesser opponents. But as the battle fever fades and the adrenaline ebbs, he feels no triumph, only a profound exhaustion of the spirit and a growing certainty that there must be more to the way than this. Chapter 8: The Broom and the Sword. In the aftermath of Ikijoji, Musashi is physically wounded but spiritually devastated. He has won a tremendous victory, has single-handedly destroyed one of Japan's most prestigious martial arts schools, but the victory feels hollow, even sickening. He has killed many men, some of them barely more than kids, students who had committed no offense except being loyal to their school and their masters. He has demonstrated beyond any doubt that he is the deadlier fighter, but what has he proven beyond that? That he can kill efficiently? He knew that already. That his techniques work in actual combat? He knew that too. The mountain of corpses at Ikijoji has taught him nothing he could not have learned in other ways, and the cost, both to the dead and to his own soul, seems disproportionate to any gain. Seeking some kind of peace, some escape from the bloody memories that fill his mind, Musashi wanders to a small temple deep in the countryside. Here he observes an old monk sweeping the garden path. The monk's movements are unhurried, precise, meditative. Each stroke of the broom is complete in itself, neither rushed nor delayed. The monk is not trying to finish sweeping so he can do something else. Sweeping is the entirety of his existence in this moment. Musashi watches for a long time, transfixed. He recognizes in the monk's movements the same quality he seeks in his sword work: complete presence, no wasted motion, perfect harmony between intention and action. But the monk achieves this state through sweeping, through the most mundane, humble activity imaginable. This observation becomes a crucial insight. Mastery is not about the activity itself, but about the quality of attention brought to it. Whether sweeping a path, painting a picture, brewing tea, or fighting with swords, the principle is the same. What matters is not what you do, but how you do it, with how much consciousness, how much presence, how much dedication to perfection in the moment. This understanding begins to resolve Musashi's spiritual crisis. The path forward is not to abandon the sword. He is a swordsman that will not change, but to transform his relationship with the sword. It should become not a means of killing, but a means of self-expression, a way of manifesting in physical action the same quality of attention that the monk brings to sweeping. Musashi begins to see that the way of the sword is ultimately not about swords at all. Book Roman 3, Fire. The third book, named for fire, depicts Musashi at his most intense and confrontational. Like fire, he consumes obstacles, transforms everything he encounters, and cannot be contained by conventional boundaries. This section follows his continued travels across Japan, his encounters with various masters and challengers, and his growing reputation as an unconventional fighter who cannot be defeated by ordinary means. But fire also purifies, and through his fiery trials, Musashi burns away more of his own limitations. Chapter 1. The Circular Swath. After Kyoto and the destruction of the Yoshioka school, Musashi leaves the imperial capital and resumes his wandering across Japan. His fame has spread far and wide now. The story of Ikijoji has traveled through the martial arts world like wildfire, growing with each retelling. Some say he defeated 100 men single-handed. Others claim he used dark magic or had supernatural assistance. The truth is impressive enough, but legend always outruns reality. This fame brings both benefits and burdens. Challengers seek him out wherever he goes, eager to test themselves against the man who destroyed the Yoshioka. Most of these challengers are no match for him, and he defeats them easily, sometimes without even needing to draw his sword. His presence alone enough to unnerve opponents who realize too late that they have overestimated their own abilities. But Musashi finds this constant stream of easy victories tiresome rather than gratifying. He cannot learn from opponents who are vastly inferior to him. He cannot grow by defeating men whose techniques he can read from the moment they take their stance. He needs to find fighters of genuine ability, masters who have achieved real understanding, opponents who can push him to new levels of performance and insight. Most of his time is spent not fighting, but practicing, endless hours of solitary training, swinging his swords through patterns until his arms ache and his calluses split. The chapter's title refers to an image that recurs throughout this section. Musashi walking through fields of tall grass, his sword cutting a circular swath around him as he practices. This image captures his isolation. He moves through a world teeming with life, grass, trees, birds, the ordinary business of human existence, but his path carves through it all, leaving emptiness in his wake. Chapter 2. The Hazoin Spearman. Musashi's travels bring him to Nara, the ancient capital of Japan before Kyoto, a city of temples, shrines, and deer that wander freely through the streets. Here he learns of the Hazoin, a Buddhist temple whose monks have developed a distinctive and formidable school of spear fighting. The founder, the priest Ine, was a remarkable figure who combined deep Buddhist learning with practical martial skill. He invented the Jumonji-yari, a cross-bladed spear that could catch and trap an opponent's sword, an elevated spear technique from a battlefield necessity to an art form rivaling swordsmanship in sophistication. Musashi is intrigued by the challenge the spear presents. He has trained almost exclusively with swords and has rarely faced spearmen of genuine skill. The spear has inherent advantages over the sword: greater reach, the ability to thrust and cut from a distance, and a master spearman can keep a swordsman at bay indefinitely, striking before the swordsman can close to his effective range. Musashi needs to understand how to overcome these advantages, how to close the distance without being impaled, how to negate reach through timing and positioning. He visits the Hazoin and, after considerable negotiation with the monks, who are understandably cautious about his reputation, arranges a series of practice matches. The training sessions with the Hazoin monks are mutually enlightening. Musashi discovers that his sword techniques require significant modification to work against the spear. He must be more patient, must draw the spear attack out, and then move inside its arc at the critical moment. The monks, for their part, are impressed by Musashi's adaptability and insight. Unlike most swordsmen, who stubbornly try to force their techniques to work in all situations, Musashi adjusts his approach based on what the situation requires. He treats the monks with respect, acknowledging their mastery even as he learns to defeat their techniques. This exchange exemplifies Musashi's fundamental approach to learning. Every opponent is a teacher, every fight an opportunity for growth. He leaves the Hazoin with deeper understanding of both spear technique and the principles underlying all combat, principles that transcend any particular weapon. Chapter 3: The Sickle and Chain. Musashi's quest for challenging opponents leads him to Shishido Bacon, a master of the Kusarigama, the sickle and chain. This weapon, favored by farmers and commoners because it could be disguised as an agricultural tool, combines a sharp sickle with a weighted chain. In skilled hands, it is devastatingly effective. The chain can entangle an opponent's weapon or limbs, while the sickle delivers killing blows. Bacon has become famous for defeating samurai who looked down on him because of his common weapon and common origins. He takes particular pleasure in humiliating sword-carrying warriors, proving that a peasant with the right skills can overcome aristocratic pretension. The duel takes place on a riverbank at dawn. Bacon immediately begins whirling his chain in complex patterns, creating a defensive screen that Musashi cannot penetrate with a straightforward attack. The weighted end of the chain whistles through the air, threatening to smash Musashi's skull or wrap around his sword arm if he moves too aggressively. Musashi studies the patterns, waiting for understanding to emerge. He notices that the chain has a rhythm, that Bacon's patterns, however complex they seem, repeat themselves. He begins to predict where the chain will be a moment before it arrives, creating mental spaces where attack might be possible. The breakthrough comes unexpectedly. Musashi suddenly throws his short sword, not at Bacon directly, but at the arc of the chain. The throw disrupts Bacon's rhythm for just an instant, creates just enough confusion for Musashi to close the distance. He is inside the chain's effective range now, too close for Bacon to use it, and his long sword flashes once. Bacon falls, defeated by an unconventional tactic that no previous opponent had attempted. Musashi retrieves his thrown sword and contemplates what he has learned. The fight has reinforced his conviction that effective combat requires flexibility, creativity, the willingness to abandon conventional approaches when they don't serve the situation. A warrior who can only fight one way is a warrior waiting to meet someone who negates that way. Chapter 4: The Woodcutter. Deep in a mountainous region far from the centers of culture and martial arts, Musashi encounters a simple woodcutter whose skill with an axe strikes him with the force of revelation. The woodcutter is not a warrior. He has never held a sword, never trained in any martial art, never thought about combat theory. He simply cuts wood, as his father did before him and his grandfather before that. But his movements have a quality that Musashi immediately recognizes as mastery, each swing of the axe perfectly efficient, neither too forceful nor too weak, placing the blade exactly where it needs to go with no wasted motion. Musashi spends several days with the woodcutter, observing his work and conversing with him in the evenings. The man is bemused by Musashi's intense interest in something so mundane as chopping trees, but he is hospitable and willing to talk about his craft. He explains how he reads each tree before cutting it, how the grain runs, where the natural weak points are, how it will fall when cut. He describes the feeling in his hands when the axe is moving correctly, a feeling of rightness that tells him the cut will be true. He speaks of years spent developing this feeling, learning through thousands of cuts until conscious calculation became unnecessary. For the woodcutter, none of this is philosophical or spiritual. He simply cuts wood because that is his work, and he has done it for so many years that every motion has been refined to its essence. He has never thought about principles or techniques. He simply acts. But Musashi understands that this unthinking mastery, where technique has been so thoroughly internalized that conscious thought is unnecessary, is exactly what he must achieve with the sword. The woodcutter, in his humble, unassuming way, is a master of his own form of the way. He has reached through endless practice the same state that Zen masters describe in their writings, that tea masters seek in their ceremonies, that poets pursue in their verses. Chapter 5: The Demon's Domain. Musashi hears rumors of a notorious bandit group operating in the mountains, terrorizing travelers and villages throughout the region. Their leader calls himself the Demon, whether because of his fearsome appearance, his ruthless methods, or his own self-aggrandizement is unclear. Local authorities have been unable to suppress the group. The terrain is too rough, and the demon's fighting ability has defeated every warrior sent against him. Musashi sees in this situation both a challenge worthy of his skills and an opportunity to do genuine good in the world, to use his abilities for something beyond personal development. What Musashi discovers complicates his simple notion of bandits as villains to be defeated. Many of these men are former samurai, ronin who lost their positions when their lords were defeated in the civil wars. They have no other skills than fighting, no way to earn an honest living in the new peace, no place in the rigid social hierarchy of Tokugawa Japan. They turn to banditry not from greed, but from desperation. The demon himself is a bitter, twisted man whose resentment against the society that cast him out has curdled into cruelty. He was once a promising warrior serving a minor lord. Now he terrorizes peasants because it is the only power left to him. The confrontation between Musashi and the demon is both physical and philosophical. Musashi defeats him in combat. The demon's skills, formidable against ordinary opponents, cannot match Musashi's developed mastery, but the victory feels hollow. These men are not enemies he sought, they are victims of the same historical forces that shaped his own life. Under different circumstances, with different choices or different luck, Musashi might have been one of them. He scatters the bandit gang but spares most of the men, taking the demon prisoner rather than killing him. The episode darkens Musashi's mood and complicates his understanding of the warrior's role in society. Chapter 6. Old Asuga's Pursuit. Throughout Musashi's travels and combats, he is pursued by enemies less formidable than his martial opponents, but no less persistent. Chief among these is Asugi, Matahachi's mother, whose obsession with Musashi has grown into the defining purpose of her life. She has convinced herself utterly that Musashi is responsible for every misfortune that has befallen her family, her son's disgrace, Atsu's abandonment, the shame that has destroyed the Hanaiden family's reputation. She travels the country with her son-in-law, a bumbling man called Uncle Gon, searching for Musashi with murder in her heart. Their pursuit is often comic in its incompetence. The elderly woman and her hapless companion are no physical match for Musashi, and their schemes invariably fail through a combination of bad luck, poor planning, and Musashi's almost supernatural awareness of danger. But there is a tragic dimension to Asuga's obsession as well. She has wasted years of her life chasing a phantom enemy, nurturing hatred that poisons every other relationship, dedicating all her remaining energy to a revenge she will never achieve. Her obsession has consumed her, turning her from a respected family matriarch into a figure of dark comedy, despised and pitied by everyone who encounters her. Meanwhile, we learn more about Matahachi's continued decline. After Oko tired of him, his usefulness ended, his novelty worn off, he drifted into increasingly disgraceful situations. He has tried various schemes to regain status and wealth, all of which have failed. He has worked as a scribe, a messenger, a gambler, a petty thief. At his lowest points, he has even impersonated Musashi, using his former friend's growing reputation to impress gullible people before slinking away when the deception threatens to be exposed. The contrast between Matahachi's continued descent and Musashi's continued ascent becomes ever more stark. Chapter 7. The Stone Buddha. In a remote area, Musashi comes upon a massive stone Buddha, carved into a hillside by some ancient craftsman whose name has been forgotten. The figure has been weathered by centuries of rain and wind, covered with moss in places, its features softened by time. Yet despite this deterioration, or perhaps because of it, the Buddha radiates a quality of serenity and strength that stops Musashi in his tracks. He sits before the statue for hours, contemplating it, trying to understand the source of its power. The sculptor who created this figure is long dead, Musashi reflects. The temple that once housed it may have been destroyed, the sect that worshipped it may have dispersed. But the Buddha endures, communicating something timeless to whoever encounters it. The sculptor achieved a kind of immortality through his art, not the immortality of fame or reputation, but the immortality of having created something that speaks directly to the human spirit across the ages. Musashi begins to see parallels between the sculptor's art and his own pursuit. Both seek to reveal a perfect form hidden within raw material. The sculptor works with stone, while Musashi works with his own body and spirit, trying to carve away everything unnecessary until only the essential remains. Inspired by this insight, Musashi attempts to carve his own Buddha figure from a piece of wood he finds nearby. His first efforts are crude. He has the vision but not yet the technique. But the process teaches him valuable lessons about patience, attention, and the relationship between intention and execution. Musashi begins to develop an interest in art that will become an important part of his later life, recognizing that the way of the sword and the way of art share fundamental principles. Book Roman 4, Wind. The fourth book, named for Wind, explores the external influences and teachings that shape Musashi's development. Like wind, these influences are invisible forces that nonetheless move things, change things, carry seeds to new soil. This section introduces Sasaki Kajiro, the elegant rival who will eventually become Musashi's greatest opponent, and explores Musashi's interactions with the cultural and intellectual currents of his time. Chapter 1. Wind in the Pines. Musashi's wanderings bring him to Edo, the new capital that Tokugawa Ieyasu is building from what was recently a small fishing village. The city is an enormous construction site, a place of energy and ambition unmatched anywhere else in Japan. Samurai from every province have gathered here seeking positions with the shogunate. Merchants have come to profit from the building boom. Craftsmen of every type find endless work as the city expands. The political situation has stabilized under Tokugawa rule, and the great civil wars seem to be ending. An era of peace, what historians will later call the Pax Tokugawa, is beginning. For warriors like Musashi, this transition from war to peace poses profound questions. In an age of constant warfare, martial arts had obvious practical value. Now that value is less clear. Many samurai are adjusting by becoming bureaucrats, administrators, police, roles that require literacy and organizational skills rather than combat ability. Others are opening schools, attempting to transmit their martial knowledge to students who may never need to use it in actual combat. Still others drift into the amusements that Edo increasingly offers, spending their stipends on gambling and pleasure quarters. Musashi cannot imagine abandoning the sword, but he also cannot simply continue wandering and fighting forever. What is the purpose of martial arts in a peaceful era? He takes lodging in a poor district of Edo and continues his practice, now focusing intensely on the two-sword style that will become his signature. Conventional swordsmanship uses only one blade at a time, the long sword for cutting, the short sword as a backup, or for close quarters. But Musashi believes that using both simultaneously offers advantages that have been overlooked. The two swords create a more complex defensive screen. They allow simultaneous attack and defense. They provide backup if one blade is disabled. Most importantly, mastering two-sword technique requires a level of coordination and ambidexterity that develops the warrior's overall ability beyond what single-sword practice can achieve. Chapter 2. Sasaki Kajiro. This chapter introduces in depth the character who will become Musashi's greatest rival and eventual opponent, Sasaki Kajiro. In many ways, Kajiro is Musashi's opposite. Where Musashi is rough, self-taught, and unconventional, Kajiro is elegant, formally trained, and technically flawless. Where Musashi cares nothing for social status and lives simply, Kajiro cultivates expensive tastes and seeks official appointment. Where Musashi is introspective and sometimes troubled by the violence his path requires, Kajiro seems utterly comfortable with killing, approaching it as a craft to be perfected rather than a moral problem to be wrestled with. Kajiro comes from a refined background and has studied with several of Japan's greatest sword masters. His technique is considered by many to be the most beautiful in Japan, not just effective but aesthetically pleasing, each movement perfect in form and timing. His signature technique is the tsubeim gishi, or swallow counter, an overhead cut of such blinding speed that it can supposedly strike down a swallow in flight. This technique has become legendary. Challengers who face Kajiro find themselves defeated before they can even complete their first attack, cut down by a blur of steel they never see clearly. But Kajiro's perfection is of a particular kind. He has mastered the external forms of swordsmanship without, perhaps, achieving the internal transformation that Musashi seeks. He is cold at his core, his pride shading into cruelty, his ambition purely worldly. He has killed many men, some in formal duels, others in incidents that skirt the edges of murder and shows no apparent remorse or reflection. For Kojiro, the sword is an instrument of power and status, a means to achieve the recognition and position he believes he deserves. Chapter 3. The Flying Horse continued. In Edo, Musashi encounters a spirited young kid named Jotaro whose circumstances mirror his own in certain ways. Jotaro's father was a samurai killed in one of the recent conflicts, leaving his son orphaned and adrift in a society with little place for masterless children. The kid has been surviving on the streets through a combination of cunning, theft, and sheer stubborn will. He dreams of becoming a great warrior, of restoring his family's honor, of achieving the glory his father never found. When he sees Musashi defeat several opponents in a street confrontation, dispatching them with an almost casual efficiency that Jotaro has never witnessed, he is instantly captivated. Here, he thinks, is a real warrior, not the posturing fools he has seen before, but someone who has achieved genuine mastery. Jotaro attaches himself to Musashi with the persistence of a hungry dog, begging to become his student. Musashi initially refuses. He doesn't consider himself ready to teach, doesn't want the responsibility of another life depending on him, values his solitude and freedom too highly to compromise them for a student. But Jotaro will not be deterred. He follows Musashi everywhere, sleeps outside his door, performs unsolicited services, and generally makes himself impossible to ignore. Eventually, Musashi accepts the kid as a companion, not formally as a student, a distinction that matters in the hierarchical world of martial arts, but as someone who travels with him and helps with practical matters. The relationship adds a new dimension to the narrative and to Musashi's character. He must now think not only about his own development, but also about his responsibility to this young life that has chosen to follow him. Jotaro is impetuous, hot-tempered, and prone to acting before thinking, much like the young Taxo before his transformation. Musashi sees in the kid both the potential for greatness and the danger of uncontrolled passion. Teaching Jotaro, even informally, forces Musashi to articulate insights that he has previously held only intuitively. Explaining why a technique works, or why patience matters, or how to read an opponent's intentions helps Musashi understand his own understanding more deeply. Chapter 4. The Art of Living. Through various connections and chance encounters, Musashi is gradually introduced to the cultural circles of Edo. He meets artists, poets, tea masters, and scholars, people who have dedicated their lives to pursuits that seem far removed from swordsmanship, yet who speak of their work in terms that Musashi recognizes. They talk about years of disciplined practice, about the gradual refinement of technique until conscious effort disappears, about achieving states of absorbed concentration where the distinction between self and activity dissolves. These are the same experiences Musashi has had with the sword, expressed in different vocabulary. A master calligrapher explains to Musashi that the brush is a sword and the paper is an opponent. Each stroke must be executed with perfect intention and no hesitation. A moment's doubt or wavering will show in the line. You cannot correct a brushstroke once it is made, just as you cannot recall a sword cut once it is launched. The calligrapher speaks of achieving a state where the hand moves by itself, guided by something deeper than conscious thought, producing characters that express not just meaning, but the writer's essential nature. Musashi recognizes this description. It matches his own experience of combat at its best, when everything else falls away and only the pure action remains. Inspired by these conversations, Musashi begins practicing calligraphy and ink painting. He approaches these arts with the same intensity he brings to sword training, spending hours each day with brush and paper. His early efforts are crude, but he improves rapidly, bringing his warrior's discipline to this new field. He discovers that these arts help refine his perception in ways that transfer back to combat. Painting requires seeing, really seeing, the essence of a subject and capturing it with minimal means. This same capacity for essential perception serves a warrior well, allowing him to see through an opponent's feints and postures to the real intention beneath. Chapter 5. Atsu's Journey. The narrative returns to Atsu, who has continued her search for Musashi despite years of hardship and repeated disappointments. Her journey has taken her throughout Japan, following rumors and reports, always seeming to arrive at places Musashi has just left. She has grown from a naive village girl into a capable, resilient woman who can take care of herself in almost any circumstance. She has learned to read people, to sense danger, to find help when she needs it, and avoid exploitation when she can. Her skills as a flute player have developed considerably. She plays with genuine artistry now, and her performances attract attention and sufficient income to sustain her travels. When she finally reaches Edo, she hears that Musashi is somewhere in the city. But Edo is vast and chaotic, nothing like the villages and small towns where she has searched before. The population is enormous and constantly shifting as workers, merchants, and samurai flow in and out. Musashi has no fixed address, no official position, no connections that Atsu can trace. She searches systematically, asking at martial arts schools, at temples, at places where warriors gather, but information is contradictory and often unreliable. Several times she comes heartbreakingly close, misses him by hours, arrives at a place he has just departed, hears that he was seen heading in a particular direction only to discover the report was wrong. When they finally do meet again, the reunion is as painful as their previous encounters. Musashi is genuinely moved to see her. He cannot pretend otherwise, but he maintains his position that he cannot be with her. His path requires solitude, he says. Attachment would compromise his training. He is not yet the man he needs to become and cannot know when or if that man will ever exist. Atsu listens and then responds with a persistence that matches his own. She has followed him for years, she points out. She has faced dangers and hardships he cannot imagine. She has not asked him to abandon his path, only to let her walk beside him on it. But Musashi cannot or will not agree, and they part again, he to continue his training, she to continue her waiting. Chapter 6. The Obata School. Musashi's growing interest in the broader applications of martial knowledge leads him to the Obata School, a prestigious military academy that teaches not just individual combat techniques, but comprehensive military strategy. The school's curriculum includes cavalry tactics, infantry formations, siege warfare, fortification, logistics, and command, all the skills required to lead armies and win battles rather than merely to defeat individual opponents. This is martial arts on a different scale than Musashi has practiced, and he is curious to understand how the principles he has discovered apply to larger contexts. With some difficulty, the Obata school is selective and does not normally admit wandering swordsmen. Musashi gains permission to observe their training. He watches students move through exercises that simulate battlefield conditions, learns the vocabulary and concepts of military strategy, and engages in discussions with the school's instructors. The head of the school, an elderly veteran of the civil wars who actually commanded troops in battle, recognizes Musashi's abilities and grants him several private audiences. They discuss the relationship between individual combat and battlefield command. Different mentalities and skills are required at different scales, yet underlying principles connect them all. Musashi emerges from this experience with a clearer understanding of both his strengths and his limitations. He recognizes that his gifts lie in personal combat rather than large-scale strategy. He could perhaps lead a small unit of warriors effectively, but commanding armies, with all the logistics, politics, and organizational complexity that entails, is not his destiny. This self-knowledge is itself important. A warrior must understand what he is suited for and focus his energies accordingly. Musashi's way is the way of individual mastery, the perfection of the self through the sword. Chapter 7. The Seeds of Change. This chapter brings together multiple plot threads that have been developing separately, showing how the various characters and storylines are converging toward eventual collision. Matahachi, still drifting through life, has arrived in Edo and discovered that Musashi is famous while he himself is forgotten. His jealousy and resentment intensify. He drinks heavily, tells exaggerated stories about his connection to the famous swordsman, and sinks deeper into self-pity. He encounters Akemi, who has also come to Edo seeking whatever fortune the growing city might offer. Their reunion rekindles complicated emotions, memories of their time with Oko, of the choices that led them to their current situations, of what might have been different. Asugi, the implacable pursuer, has obtained new information about Musashi's whereabouts and is closing in. Her hatred has kept her alive beyond what should have been her natural span. She seems to run on pure malice, a withered figure animated by nothing except the desire to see Musashi punished for crimes he did not commit. And Kojiro, hearing ever more about Musashi's reputation and achievements, becomes increasingly focused on this rival. In Kojiro's world, there can be only one greatest swordsman, and he intends to be that one. The existence of someone who might challenge his supremacy is intolerable. The chapter ends with a sense of forces gathering, of inevitable collisions approaching. The wind of the book's title has scattered these seeds across Japan. Now they are all blowing toward the same ground, where they will take root and grow into the climactic events of the later books. Book V, Sky. The fifth book, named for sky or void, represents Musashi's transcendence of mere technique. The sky contains everything yet is empty. It is the source of all weather yet remains unchanged by weather. In this section, Musashi begins to achieve the mastery that goes beyond mastery, the state where techniques have become so internalized that conscious thought is no longer necessary. This book culminates in the famous duel on Ganryu Island, the climax toward which the entire novel has been building. Chapter 1, The Castle Town. Musashi travels to Kokura, a castle town in Kyushu where the powerful Hosokawa clan holds sway. The Hosokawa are renowned not only for their military strength, but for their cultivation of the arts. Their current lord, Hosokawa Tadatoshi, is a man of exceptional refinement who has studied tea ceremony with masters, practiced Zen meditation, supported artists and craftsmen, and sought to create a domain where culture and martial prowess exist in harmony. Musashi hopes to meet this enlightened ruler and perhaps find some form of patronage, not for wealth or comfort, but for the stability that might allow him to focus entirely on perfecting his art. However, Musashi discovers that Kokura is also home to Sasaki Kojiro, who has already secured a position as sword instructor to the Hosokawa clan. Kojiro has established himself thoroughly here, living well on his stipend, enjoying the respect of the samurai community, refining his already formidable technique through teaching and occasional duels. When word spreads that both famous swordsmen are now in the same town, excitement ripples through Kokura. Everyone who cares about martial arts anticipates that a duel must follow, that these two rivals cannot exist in the same space without one of them challenging the other. Both Musashi and Kojiro are aware of these expectations, but proceed with their own affairs. Musashi continues his training and begins exploring the artistic community of Kokura, meeting the craftsmen and artists whom Hosokawa Tadatoshi has attracted to his domain. Kojiro continues teaching, instructing the Hosokawa samurai in his elegant technique, polishing his reputation, and preparing, always preparing, for the confrontation he knows is coming. The tension builds throughout Kokura, a tension that everyone can feel even though no formal challenge has yet been issued. Chapter 2, The Artisan's Way. While waiting for circumstances to develop with Kojiro, Musashi immerses himself in the community of artisans who serve the Hosokawa household. He visits a master swordsmith and spends hours watching the complex process of forging a blade. The smith explains each step: the selection of raw iron, the heating and folding that drives out impurities and creates the characteristic grain patterns, the differential hardening that gives the edge its cutting power while leaving the spine flexible enough to absorb impact without breaking. Musashi watches as glowing steel is drawn from the forge, hammered into shape, quenched in water with a hissing explosion of steam. He sees parallels between this process and his own development: the heating of raw material, the hammering that removes imperfections, the tempering that creates the proper balance of hardness and flexibility. He visits a master potter whose hands shape clay on the wheel with movements so subtle and precise that the clay seems to form itself. He observes carpenters joining wood without nails, dyers creating colors that seem to glow from within the fabric, weavers producing patterns of extraordinary complexity through the rhythmic motion of their looms. In each craft, he sees the same principle at work: Years of dedicated practice leading to a state where conscious technique disappears and only natural, perfect action remains. These artisans have achieved through their humble crafts the same mastery that Musashi seeks through the sword. This recognition transforms Musashi's understanding of what he is pursuing. The way is universal. What changes is only the medium through which it is expressed. The sword is his medium, but the understanding he seeks is the same understanding sought by every true artist, every genuine craftsman. This insight lifts him above the level of mere martial skill toward something approaching wisdom. He begins to formulate ideas that will eventually be recorded in his Book of 5 Rings, that the principles of combat apply to all areas of life, that mastery in one domain can illuminate mastery in others, that the deepest understanding transcends any particular activity and reveals the nature of existence itself. Chapter 3. Lord Hosokawa. Musashi is finally granted an audience with Lord Hosokawa Tadatoshi, and the meeting proves transformative. Hosokawa is unlike any ruler Musashi has encountered, neither a mere patron seeking to acquire a famous warrior for his collection, nor a simple lord interested only in military matters. He is a cultivated man who understands the deeper significance of what Musashi is pursuing, who recognizes in Musashi's quest for martial perfection a spiritual journey parallel to his own interests in Zen Buddhism and the tea ceremony. Their conversation ranges widely: philosophy, art, history, the nature of the warrior's path in an era of peace. Hosokawa proves to be both knowledgeable and insightful, offering perspectives that challenge and refine Musashi's thinking. He suggests that Musashi's two-sword style represents not merely a technical innovation, but a philosophical statement. By using both swords simultaneously, Musashi is expressing a kind of completeness, a unity of opposites. The long sword and the short sword, attack and defense, strength and flexibility, all are integrated into a single flowing whole. Hosokawa also speaks frankly about the impending confrontation with Kojiro. As Kojiro's employer, he cannot directly support Musashi in any conflict between them. That would violate his obligations to a retainer. But he makes clear his personal admiration for Musashi's approach to the martial arts, for the spiritual dimension that elevates Musashi's swordsmanship beyond mere killing technique. This conversation gives Musashi a model of what he might eventually become: a warrior philosopher who has integrated combat skill with broader wisdom, who uses his position not merely to fight but to support others' pursuit of excellence. Chapter 4. The Opponent's Mind. In preparation for the inevitable confrontation, Musashi begins studying Kojiro systematically. Not just his techniques, though those are formidable and require careful analysis, but his personality, his habits, his psychology. True victory, Musashi has come to understand, is achieved before the first blow is struck. A warrior who enters combat with a clear mind and stable emotions has already gained enormous advantage over one who is agitated, fearful, or overconfident. Musashi observes Kojiro from afar, notes his patterns, analyzes his character. Kojiro is proud to the point of arrogance. He sees a man who has never been seriously challenged and who therefore may underestimate the possibility of defeat. Kojiro relies heavily on his technical superiority, on the tsubamegishi that has never failed him. But technique alone is not enough against an opponent who refuses to engage on expected terms. And Kojiro has a temper that can be provoked, a flaw that might be exploited. Musashi also examines his own potential weaknesses with ruthless honesty. He tends sometimes to underestimate opponents, to allow his confidence to shade into carelessness. His technique, while effective, lacks the polish and elegance of Kojiro's. It is rougher, more direct, optimized for effectiveness rather than beauty. In a contest where both fighters perform perfectly, Kojiro might have the edge. Therefore, Musashi must ensure that Kojiro does not perform perfectly, must find ways to disrupt the equilibrium that allows Kojiro's technique to function at its best. Chapter 5. The Old Woman's Last Chance. Asugi has also made her way to Kokura, having heard that both Musashi and her wretched son Matahachi are somewhere in the region. Her pursuit of Musashi has become the defining purpose of her existence, the hatred that has kept her alive, that has propelled her across Japan for years, that has consumed every other relationship and interest. She is ancient now, withered and frail, her body kept moving only by the force of her obsessive will. In a scene that is both pathetic and disturbing, Asugi finally catches up with Musashi and attempts to attack him. Her assault is feeble. She is an old woman against a master warrior, and Musashi easily restrains her without causing harm. What happens next is unexpected. Instead of dismissing her with contempt or turning her over to authorities, Musashi treats her with gentle pity. He recognizes her as Matahachi's mother, the woman from his home village, someone who has wasted her life on a misconception. He tries to explain that he never corrupted Matahachi, that he has actually been hoping to find his old friend and help him, that the narrative she has constructed is false in every particular. But Asugi is beyond reason. Her hatred has crystallized into something impervious to evidence or argument. She cannot accept that she has wasted decades pursuing an innocent man, that her son's failures are his own responsibility, that her vendetta has been a tragic mistake. To accept these things would require her to face the emptiness of her life, and that she cannot do. Musashi releases her, knowing she will continue to pursue him, but unwilling to harm an elderly woman regardless of her intentions. The encounter serves as a reminder of how consuming hatred destroys the hater more surely than the hated. Chapter 6. The Eve of Battle. The formal challenge has been issued and accepted. The duel between Musashi and Sasaki Kajiro will take place on Ganryu Island, a small rocky island in the strait between Honshu and Kyushu. The location is chosen for its neutrality. Belonging to no one, it will provide a stage where the two greatest swordsmen of the generation can settle their rivalry without interference. The date is set for early morning, when the light will be clear and both fighters will be fresh. The night before, both warriors prepare in their own ways. Kajiro spends the evening polishing his famous Nadachi, the extra-long sword that gives him reach advantage over opponents using standard weapons. He practices his techniques one final time, visualizing each movement, feeling the sword as an extension of his body. He is confident, perhaps too confident, dismissive of this rough, self-taught opponent who lacks formal credentials. Kajiro goes to sleep early, wanting to be fully rested for the morning's work. Musashi's preparation is entirely different. He spends the evening carving a wooden sword from a spare boat ore he has obtained. This humble weapon, roughly shaped but somewhat longer than a standard sword, will be his only armament against Kajiro's steel blade. The carving itself is a form of meditation, a way of focusing his mind and centering his spirit. He also deliberately stays up late, and the next morning he will oversleep intentionally, arriving late to the duel. This is not mere rudeness but calculated psychological warfare. Kajiro, waiting impatiently on the island, will grow agitated. His equilibrium will be disturbed. The cold perfection he needs for his technique will be undermined by frustration and anger. Chapter 7. Ganryu Island. The duel on Ganryu Island is the climax toward which the entire novel has been building. As the sun rises, Kajiro waits on the rocky shore, growing increasingly impatient. The appointed time passes. Minutes become an hour. Kajiro paces, mutters, struggles to maintain his composure. His disciples, watching from boats anchored offshore, grow concerned. Whereas Musashi, has he fled, proven a coward at the last moment? Has something happened to delay him? Then a boat appears and Musashi steps onto the beach. He has been sleeping during the crossing, his hair untied and wild, his manner casual almost to the point of insult. In his hand, he carries not a steel sword but the wooden oar blade he carved the night before. Kajiro, already furious at the delay, is further enraged by this apparent mockery. He draws his famous Nadachi and, in a theatrical gesture, throws away the scabbard onto the sand. The message is clear. He will not need to sheath his sword again because Musashi will be dead. Musashi responds with words that will become legendary. "You've already lost, Kajiro. A winner would never abandon his scabbard." This taunt strikes at the heart of Kajiro's confidence. The implication is devastating. Musashi is so certain of victory that he sees Kajiro's gesture not as confidence, but as desperation, the act of a man who knows he is about to die. Kajiro attacks with the Tsubeim Gishi, the swallow counter that has never failed. But Musashi has prepared for this moment. He has positioned himself with the rising sun behind him, momentarily blinding Kojiro at the critical instant. He has studied the technique and understands its rhythm, its timing, its vulnerability. As Kojiro's blade descends with its legendary speed, Musashi steps inside the arc, closer to his opponent rather than away, negating the Nadachi's reach advantage, and brings his wooden oarsword crashing down onto Kojiro's skull. The blow is fatal. Kojiro falls onto the sand, the greatest duel of the age over in a single exchange. Musashi stands for a moment, looking down at his fallen rival, this man who was in so many ways his mirror image. Then, without a backward glance, he returns to his boat and rows away, leaving Kojiro's body on the beach and his legend on the island that will forever bear his name. Book VI, Sun and Moon. The sixth book, named for the sun and moon, explores the integration of opposing principles. Sun and moon are different. One blazes with light, the other reflects it. One rules the day, the other the night. Yet both are essential to the complete cycle of existence. In this section, Musashi begins integrating aspects of himself that he had previously kept separate: warrior and artist, strength and gentleness, solitude and connection. The victory over Kojiro has freed him from the need to prove himself. Now he must discover what comes after proof. Chapter 1. After the battle. In the aftermath of the duel on Ganryu Island, Musashi finds himself in an unexpected state. Not triumph, but emptiness. He has defeated the one opponent everyone agreed was his equal, the one challenge that remained. He is now, by any reasonable measure, the greatest swordsman in Japan. And yet, what does it mean? Kojiro is dead, and Musashi feels the weight of having ended a life that, for all its flaws, was devoted to the same pursuit as his own. Kojiro sought mastery through the sword just as Musashi did. The difference between them was not of kind, but of degree, and perhaps of spirit. Musashi retreats from public attention, refusing the offers of patronage that now flood in from every direction. Lords throughout Japan would gladly employ the man who defeated Sasaki Kojiro. What prestige it would bring to have such a swordsman in one's service. But Musashi cannot imagine becoming another clan's sword instructor, teaching techniques to students who will likely never need them, spending his days in comfortable routine. Instead, he continues his wandering, but now with a different purpose. He is no longer seeking opponents to defeat. That phase of his life is over. Now he seeks deeper understanding, a mastery that goes beyond combat to encompass life itself. The days after Ganryu Island are spent in solitary practice and reflection. Musashi practices his sword techniques not to prepare for future duels, but for their own sake, as a form of moving meditation. He paints, his brush capturing the essence of landscapes, birds, and the natural world with bold, economical strokes. He writes, setting down the insights he has accumulated over years of combat and contemplation. He thinks about what it means to be a warrior in peacetime, about the relationship between the way of death and the way of life, about how one integrates the capacity for violence with the requirements of civilization. Chapter 2. The Return. After years of wandering, Musashi returns to his home village of Miyamoto. The village seems smaller than he remembered, humbler, more ordinary. The great world he has traveled through, the cities, the famous schools, the castles of powerful lords, makes this collection of farmers' huts seem almost impossibly modest. Yet this is where he began, where the violent, instinct-driven Taxo first drew breath and first killed a man. His sister Oghin has aged, the years of hardship, of maintaining the family holding alone, of living with the stigma of her brother's early reputation, have taken their toll. But she welcomes him with tears of joy, unable to believe that the famous swordsman all Japan speaks of is her little brother, the wild kid she once despaired of. Musashi visits their father's grave and spends long moments in silence, reflecting on the man who shaped him through harshness and violence, who taught him the sword but not wisdom, who died bitter and alone. The villagers treat Musashi with a mixture of awe, fear, and confusion. He is famous throughout Japan, a legendary figure, yet to them he is still Taxo, the troublemaker, the killer, the kid who brought shame on the village. They cannot reconcile the legend with their memories. Musashi spends several peaceful weeks in Miyamoto, helping Oghin with farm work, repairing the house that has fallen into disrepair, reconnecting with the rhythms of agricultural life. He discovers that he enjoys this simple work, that there is satisfaction in planting and harvesting, in tending animals, in the basic activities that sustain human existence. Chapter 3. Matahachi's Fall. The narrative now follows Matahachi to his lowest point. He has continued his downward spiral since we last saw him, drifting from disgrace to disgrace, unable to break the pattern of failure and self-destruction. He has tried various schemes to regain status, impersonating Musashi, inventing stories of his own prowess, attempting petty frauds, but each scheme has collapsed, often leaving him in worse circumstances than before. His drinking has become severe. He is almost unrecognizable as the young man who once dreamed of glory at Sekigahara. In a poignant scene, Matahachi sees Musashi from a distance, but cannot bring himself to approach. The shame is too great. He watches his former friend, successful, famous, respected, and feels the accumulated weight of every wrong choice, every moment of weakness, every opportunity squandered. He could have been what Musashi is. They started from the same place, had the same chances. The difference is nothing but character and choice. But knowing this only makes the pain worse. Matahachi slinks away, unable to face the living evidence of what he might have been. Musashi, for his part, has been looking for Matahachi, hoping to help his childhood friend recover from whatever troubles have befallen him. The villagers have told him fragments of Matahachi's story, enough to suggest the trajectory of his decline. But Matahachi actively avoids being found. He cannot bear Musashi's pity, which would be worse than his contempt. The two men who left Miyamoto together, who fought at Sekigahara together, who seemed at one time to have similar destinies, have diverged so far that they can no longer occupy the same space. Chapter 4. The Farmer's Wisdom. During his time in the countryside, Musashi has extensive conversations with farmers and villagers, people with no knowledge of martial arts or philosophy, no education beyond what life itself has taught them. He is struck by their practical wisdom, their intimate understanding of natural rhythms, their acceptance of circumstances beyond their control combined with vigorous effort toward goals within their control. An old farmer explains to Musashi the principle of patient cultivation. You cannot force a crop to grow faster by pulling on it, the farmer says. You cannot make rain fall or sun shine by wanting it. All you can do is prepare the soil properly, plant at the right time, tend the growing plants with appropriate care, and then wait. The harvest comes when it comes, not when you demand it. This principle, Musashi realizes, applies equally to martial arts and spiritual development. One cannot force progress or rush enlightenment. One can only practice correctly and allow understanding to develop in its own time. Another farmer speaks of harmonizing with nature rather than fighting against it. A good farmer works with rain and sun, with the patterns of the seasons, with the nature of each crop. A poor farmer curses the weather and blames circumstances for his failures. Musashi sees this as another expression of the principle he seeks to embody in combat, not forcing, not struggling, but finding the natural flow of events and moving with it. The simplest, most uneducated people often understand these principles better than sophisticated philosophers who complicate what should be simple. Chapter 5. Atsu's Decision. Atsu learns that Musashi has returned to Miyamoto and travels there, hoping that his homecoming might signal a change of heart. Perhaps being back in the place where they both grew up, surrounded by memories of their shared youth, will soften his resistance to their relationship. Perhaps the great swordsman, having achieved everything he sought, will now be ready to accept the love she has offered him for so many years. Their reunion is emotionally complex. Musashi is genuinely happy to see Atsu. His face lights up in a way that those who know him in combat would not recognize. He has thought of her constantly during his wandering years, has preserved her image in his memory as a touchstone of gentleness and devotion. But he still hesitates to commit to her. The habits of solitude are deeply ingrained, the fear that love will compromise his edge, that attachment will make him vulnerable, still operates in his psyche. Atsu, for the first time, openly challenges this fear. She has waited years for him, she says. She has followed him across Japan, endured hardships he cannot imagine, kept faith when any sensible person would have given up. She has not asked him to abandon his path, she asks only to walk beside him on it. Other great masters have had wives, families, students who loved them. Why does Musashi believe he must be different? Her argument is passionate and logical, and it shakes Musashi's certainty. He does not immediately change his mind, but he begins to question the assumption that has governed his life since leaving the donjon. Chapter 6. The True Enemy. Through long nights of reflection and conversation with Atsu, Musashi comes to a crucial realization. His greatest enemy has never been Kajiro or the Yoshioka school or any external opponent. His greatest enemy has been himself, his own pride, his own rigidity, his own fear of vulnerability. By keeping Atsu at a distance, he was not demonstrating strength but weakness. He was afraid that love would soften him, that attachment would create openings his enemies could exploit. But this fear itself was an opening, a limitation, a failure to achieve the completeness he claimed to seek. True strength, Musashi now understands, must encompass all of life, not just combat and training, but love and connection and ordinary human existence. A warrior who cannot love is incomplete, just as a person who cannot fight when necessary is incomplete. The goal is not to choose between warrior and lover, but to integrate both aspects into a fully realized human being. The sword and the heart are not enemies, they are partners, each making the other more complete. This insight represents the culmination of Musashi's philosophical development. He has moved beyond mere martial excellence toward genuine wisdom. The wild kid from Miyamoto, who thought strength meant nothing but the ability to kill, has become a man who understands that true strength includes the strength to be vulnerable, to love, to open oneself to another person. Book Roman 7, The Way of Life and Death. The final book completes Musashi's journey from warrior to sage. He has achieved what he set out to achieve, unmatched skill with the sword. But he has also achieved something greater, understanding of the way that underlies all particular ways, wisdom that transcends any specific technique or discipline. This book shows Musashi accepting fully the life he has earned, including the love of Atsu and the responsibility of transmitting his understanding to future generations. Chapter 1. The New Beginning. The final book opens with Musashi at a turning point. His realizations about love, attachment, and the completeness of the way have transformed his understanding, but he has not yet fully acted on this new wisdom. He remains in Miyamoto, living with his sister, spending his days in a combination of farm work, martial practice, and artistic pursuits. His paintings have become genuinely accomplished, attracting attention from collectors and connoisseurs. His calligraphy shows the same bold, direct character as his swordsmanship. He has become an artist as well as a warrior, expressing through brush and ink the same principles he discovered through the sword. But Musashi feels that his journey is not yet complete. There is still something he must do, some final integration he must achieve before he can consider himself truly fulfilled. He cannot articulate exactly what this missing piece is, but he knows it exists. The sense of incompleteness nags at him, keeps him from settling into comfortable routine, drives him to continue his practice and his reflection. Chapter 2. Disciples and Legacy. Despite his reluctance to formally teach, Musashi has attracted devoted followers over the years. Jotaro has grown from the wild kid who attached himself to Musashi in Edo into a capable young warrior, shaped by years of traveling at his master's side. Other students have joined at various points, drawn by Musashi's reputation and sustained by his example. Musashi begins to accept that teaching is part of his responsibility, that the insights he has gained through decades of practice and combat should not die with him, but should be transmitted to future generations. He begins articulating his principles more systematically, developing the framework that will eventually become his written works. But he remains an unconventional teacher, emphasizing self-discovery over rote learning, telling his students that he can show them the path, but each must walk it for themselves. He refuses to create a formal school with fixed techniques and hierarchies. Instead, he teaches principles that can be applied in countless ways depending on circumstances and individual character. His students learn not a style but an approach, not techniques but understanding. Chapter 3. Reckonings. The novel brings its various plot threads to conclusion. Matahachi, at his absolute lowest point, sick, impoverished, contemplating suicide, finally encounters Musashi face to face. The meeting is painful for both men. Matahachi is consumed with shame, barely able to meet his former friend's eyes. He expects contempt or pity, and either would be unbearable. But Musashi treats him with compassion. He does not pretend that Matahachi's choices were wise or his failures unimportant, but he also does not condemn. The past cannot be changed, Musashi says, but the future remains unwritten. Matahachi still has life, still has possibility, still can choose to become something better than he has been. With Musashi's encouragement and practical help, Matahachi begins the slow, difficult process of rebuilding. He will never be what he might have been, but he can become something worthwhile nonetheless. Asugi, the embittered pursuer, also finally confronts Musashi directly. She is ancient now, barely alive, sustained by nothing except her hatred. But in their final meeting, something unexpected happens. Perhaps because she is so close to death, perhaps because Musashi treats her with gentleness rather than anger, she begins to see the truth she has denied for so long, that her obsession was based on falsehood, that Musashi was never her enemy, that she has wasted decades pursuing a phantom. The recognition brings a kind of peace, bitter peace, mixed with regret for the years squandered, but peace nonetheless. She dies shortly after, finally released from her burden. Chapter 4. The Complete Man. Musashi's final transformation involves accepting Atsu fully into his life. Their relationship, suspended for so many years, is at last consummated, not in dramatic or romantic fashion, but in simple acknowledgement that they belong together and always have. Atsu's patient love, her willingness to wait through years of rejection, has been its own form of mastery. She achieved through devotion what Musashi achieved through discipline, complete commitment to something beyond herself. Together, they represent the integration of principles that seemed opposed: masculine and feminine, action and acceptance, strength and gentleness, sword and heart. Musashi's acknowledgement of their union is his final surrender of ego, his acceptance that true strength includes the capacity for vulnerability. The warrior who thought he had to walk alone has discovered that the path is richer when shared. Chapter 5. The Way and the Life. In the novel's final movement, Musashi achieves a state of serene mastery that encompasses all aspects of his existence. He is still a formidable warrior, perhaps more formidable than ever, because his skills are now wedded to complete inner calm. But combat is no longer central to his identity. He paints, he writes, he teaches, he farms, he loves. Each activity expresses the same underlying principle. There is no division between his martial practice and his artistic creation, between his meditation and his daily life. This is the ultimate meaning of the way. Not a path to be followed, but a manner of being, a quality of attention and intention that transforms everything it touches. Musashi has become what he sought to become, not merely the greatest swordsman, but a complete human being who happens to be a swordsman among many other things. The sword is part of him but does not define him. It is one expression of principles that can be expressed in countless ways. Chapter 6. The Open Road. The novel concludes with imagery that echoes its beginning but with transformed meaning. Musashi is again on the road, walking into an uncertain future. But now Atsu walks beside him and Jotaro follows behind. They are not fleeing or seeking, they are simply living, moving through the world with purpose and presence. The road represents the way itself. Ongoing, never complete, always offering new opportunities for growth and understanding. Musashi is perhaps 40 years old at the novel's end, with decades of life still ahead of him. The historical Musashi lived until 1645, spending his later years in service to various lords, teaching students, creating art, and writing his book of 5 rings in a cave before his death. The novel ends not with death but with continued living, suggesting that there is no final destination, only the ongoing journey. Conclusion: the legacy of Musashi. Eiji Yoshikawa's Musashi stands as one of the great novels of the 20th century, a work that transcends its specific cultural context to address universal human concerns. Through the story of one man's journey from savage youth to enlightened master, Yoshikawa explores themes that resonate across cultures and centuries. The nature of true strength, the relationship between discipline and freedom, the search for meaning, and the possibility of transformation. The historical Miyamoto Musashi was a real person whose life provided the raw material for Yoshikawa's fiction. He did develop the two-sword fighting style, did defeat the Yoshioka school and Sasaki Kajiro, did spend his later years creating art and writing philosophical works. His Book of Five Rings remains one of the most influential texts on strategy and martial arts ever written, studied not only by martial artists, but by business executives, military officers, and anyone seeking insights into competition and mastery. But Yoshikawa's genius lies in transforming this historical material into something approaching myth. His Musashi is not merely a successful fighter, but a symbol of human potential, demonstrating what can be achieved through dedication, discipline, and the willingness to keep learning and growing throughout life. The novel suggests that mastery is available to everyone in whatever field they pursue if they are willing to pay the price in effort and persistence. The rich cast of characters surrounding Musashi serves to illuminate different aspects of the human condition. Atsu shows that love, too, is a form of mastery, requiring patience, devotion, and the strength to persist through difficulty. Matahachi demonstrates the tragedy of wasted potential and the cumulative weight of small compromises. Takuen embodies wisdom that transcends conventional categories, seeing deeper truths that others miss. Kajiro represents technical perfection without spiritual depth, excellence that stops short of true mastery. Asugi illustrates how hatred and obsession can consume a life, while her ultimate recognition of the truth suggests that even the most hardened heart can find peace. Perhaps the novel's most important insight is that the way, whether expressed through martial arts, painting, tea ceremony, or any other discipline, is ultimately not about the activity itself, but about the quality of consciousness brought to it. Musashi's greatness lies not in his ability to kill, but in his transformation of the sword into a vehicle for spiritual development. He discovered that the same principles that govern combat govern all effective action: presence, adaptability, economy of effort, the integration of mind and body. These principles can be applied to any field, any challenge, any life. The novel's structure, 7 books named for classical Japanese elements, reflects Musashi's progression through different phases of development. Earth grounds him in his origins and his first transformation. Water teaches him fluidity and adaptation. Fire tests him through passionate struggle. Wind exposes him to external influences and broader perspectives. Sky represents his transcendence of mere technique. Sun and moon bring the integration of opposing principles. The way of life and death completes his journey from warrior to sage. Throughout this progression, Yoshikawa never allows Musashi to become merely a symbol or an abstraction. He remains a deeply human figure, struggling with his own weaknesses, making mistakes, experiencing doubt and confusion, needing years to understand truths that seem obvious in retrospect. His relationship with Atsu is particularly humanizing. His repeated rejections of her, his fear of vulnerability, his eventual acceptance of love as a necessary component of complete humanity. These struggles make his ultimate achievement more meaningful. He earns his wisdom through genuine effort and genuine failure. The novel also offers a meditation on the meaning of martial arts in times of peace, a question as relevant today as it was in Musashi's era or Yoshikawa's. If fighting skills are not needed for survival, what justifies the time and effort spent developing them? Yoshikawa's answer, through Musashi, is that the martial arts at their best are not about fighting at all. They are about the development of character, the refinement of perception, the cultivation of presence and awareness. A warrior who never needs to fight but who has achieved genuine mastery has gained something valuable, a way of being in the world that enriches every moment and every activity. The novel ends not with Musashi's triumph, but with his continued journey, suggesting that mastery is not a destination, but a process, not an achievement, but an orientation. The reader is left with the sense that Musashi will go on learning and growing until his last breath, that the way has no end, only deeper and deeper levels of understanding. This vision of endless growth and development, of human potential that is never fully exhausted, may be the novel's most enduring gift to its readers, the inspiration to pursue our own ways, whatever they may be, with the same dedication that Musashi brought to his. In Japanese culture, Musashi has become an icon, a figure of legend whose story has been retold countless times in novels, films, manga, and other media. But Yoshikawa's novel remains the definitive version, the one that established many of the episodes and interpretations that later works have borrowed. Its influence extends far beyond Japan. Translated into numerous languages, it has introduced millions of readers worldwide to the figure of Musashi and to the Japanese conception of the warrior's path. For contemporary readers, the novel offers both entertainment and wisdom. The narrative is compelling, the characters memorable, the action sequences thrilling. But beneath the surface adventure lies a profound exploration of what it means to pursue excellence, to face one's limitations, to transform oneself through dedicated practice. These themes transcend any particular time or culture. They speak to anyone who has ever struggled to improve, to master a skill, to become more fully human. In this sense, Musashi is not merely a historical novel or a martial arts epic. It is a guidebook for living, disguised as a tale of swords and combat. The journey from Taxo to Musashi, from wild, reactive youth to enlightened master, is a journey we can all undertake in our own ways. We may never wield a sword or face an opponent in combat, but we all face challenges that demand our best efforts, that reveal our weaknesses, that offer opportunities for growth. Yoshikawa's novel reminds us that transformation is possible, that even the most unpromising beginnings can lead to remarkable achievements, that the way is open to anyone willing to walk it. In this timeless message lies the enduring power of Musashi.